In the desert of southern Peru, there are drawings, enormous drawings. A hummingbird stretching 190 meters from wingtip to wingtip. A spider the size of a football field. A condor with a wingspan of over 130 meters. Perfect geometric lines stretching arrows straight across the desert floor for kilometers, without a single deviation. They were made by a civilization that had no aircraft, no hot air balloons, no way of seeing what they were creating from above. And yet the drawings only make sense from the air. From the ground, they are almost completely invisible, just shallow lines in the dirt. You would walk right past them without knowing. But from above, they are magnificent, precise, intentional, and completely unexplained. Who were the Nazca lines built for? Because whoever created them clearly expected someone to be looking down. Welcome back to Mysterious History, the channel where the official story is never the whole story. We have covered secret societies and Siberian explosions. Today we are heading to the high desert of Peru, to one of the most visually striking and deeply puzzling mysteries on the planet. The Nazca lines have been studied for nearly a century. Theories have come and gone, and the fundamental question at the heart of the mystery has never been satisfactorily answered. Why would a civilization with no ability to see their work from above spend generations creating images that can only be properly seen from the sky? Let us find out. The Nazca lines are a collection of geoglyphs, large designs created on the surface of the Earth. They are located in the Nazca Desert in southern Peru, a high, arid plateau between the Andes Mountains and the Pacific coast. The desert floor here is covered in a layer of reddish iron oxide pebbles. Beneath that surface layer is a pale, yellowish ground. The Nazca people created their lines by simply removing the reddish surface pebbles and piling them along the edges, exposing the lighter ground beneath. The technique is simple. The execution is extraordinary. The lines fall into several categories. There are the animal figures, called biomorphs by researchers, a hummingbird, a condor, a spider, a monkey with a spiraling tail, a pelican, a whale, a dog, a lizard, each one enormous, each one drawn in a single continuous line that never crosses itself. Then there are the geometric figures, trapezoids, triangles, and spirals covering vast areas of the desert. And then there are the straight lines, hundreds of perfectly straight lines crossing the desert in various directions. Some of them stretch for over 15 kilometers, across hills, gullies, and uneven terrain, without deviating, without curving, arrow straight. The precision of these lines has astonished engineers and surveyors who have studied them. Creating a perfectly straight line 15 kilometers long across uneven terrain is an extraordinary technical achievement, even with modern equipment. The Nazca did it without any of it. The Nazca lines were created by the Nazca culture, a pre-Columbian civilization that flourished in the region from roughly 100 BC to 800 AD. The lines themselves have been dated through various methods to somewhere between 500 BC and 500 AD, so some of them are over 2,000 years old. The Nazca were not a primitive people. They built sophisticated underground aqueducts called puquillos that still function today. They created extraordinarily detailed pottery and textiles. They had a complex social structure and religious tradition, but they left no written language, no texts explaining the lines, no records of their purpose. Everything we think we know about why the lines were created comes from inference and theory. The lines themselves are remarkably well preserved. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth. Almost no rain falls here. The wind patterns are stable and gentle. The climate that makes the region so inhospitable to human life has perfectly preserved the lines for over 2,000 years. Without that freakish climatic stability, they would have eroded long ago. The most widely accepted explanation among archaeologists is that the Nazca lines were created for religious purposes, specifically as offerings to the gods, or as pathways for ritual processions. The leading proponent of this theory was a German mathematician and archaeologist named Maria Reiche. She dedicated her life to studying and protecting the Nazca lines from the 1940s until her death in 1998. Reiche believed the lines had astronomical significance, that they aligned with solar and stellar events, marking the positions of the sun and stars at important times of year, solstices, equinoxes, the rising and setting of key constellations. She argued the lines functioned as a giant astronomical calendar, helping the Nazca predict the seasons and manage their agriculture. More recent research has both supported and challenged this theory. Some lines do align with astronomical events, but not consistently enough to suggest the entire complex was designed as an astronomical calendar. Another popular theory suggests the lines were connected to water. The Nazca Desert is desperately dry. Water was the most precious resource the Nazca had. Some researchers have noted that many of the lines and figures point toward underground water sources or seasonal water flows. The spider figure, for example, is associated with a species of spider that in Amazonian traditions is connected to rain. The lines may have been ritual requests to the gods for water, prayers written large enough for the heavens to read. No discussion of the Nazca lines is complete without addressing the theory that has captured the popular imagination more than any other: the ancient astronaut theory. Popularized by Erich von Däniken in his 1968 book Chariots of the Gods, the theory proposes that the Nazca lines were created as landing strips or signals for extraterrestrial visitors. The argument goes like this: the lines can only be properly seen from the air. The Nazca had no aircraft. Therefore, the lines were created for someone who did have aircraft, someone who was flying above the desert and needed guidance for landing or navigation. This theory has been embraced enthusiastically in popular culture and rejected almost universally by mainstream archaeology. The landing strip argument in particular falls apart under scrutiny. The desert surface is soft. Any aircraft attempting to land on the Nazca lines would immediately sink into the ground. They would make terrible runways. The signal argument is slightly more interesting, but still faces serious problems. Any civilization advanced enough to travel between star systems would presumably have navigation technology far more sophisticated than lines scratched in a desert. Most archaeologists consider the ancient astronaut theory an entertaining distraction from more serious investigation, but it refuses to go away because the fundamental question it raises is genuinely difficult to answer. Why create images that can only be seen from above? One of the most creative alternative explanations was proposed by researchers Jim Woodman and Julian Knott in the 1970s. They argued that the Nazca people may have had hot air balloons made from materials available to them: reeds for the basket, tightly woven fabric for the envelope. They built a replica using only materials and techniques the Nazca would have had available. They called it Condor 1, and they flew it successfully. rising several hundred meters above the Nazca Desert and drifting across the lines. This demonstrated that the Nazca could theoretically have built and flown hot air balloons. But it does not prove they did. No physical evidence of Nazca balloons has ever been found. No depictions of balloons in their art, no written records. The balloon theory remains intriguing but unproven. What it does establish is that creating the lines with an aerial perspective was not necessarily beyond the reach of the Nazca, given enough ingenuity and the right materials. Stepping back from the theories, here is what the evidence actually tells us. The Nazca lines required an enormous investment of time and labor. Generations of people worked on them. They were important enough to the Nazca that they dedicated significant community resources to their creation and presumably their maintenance. The techniques used to create them, while simple in concept, required sophisticated planning and execution. Modern experiments have shown that the straight lines could have been created using wooden stakes and rope. A small team with basic tools could create surprisingly precise results. The scale of the project was the challenge, not the technology, which suggests the lines were not the product of outside intervention or lost technology. They were the product of a determined and organized community with a clear vision of what they wanted to create. The question that remains is why? What vision drove them? What did they believe they were communicating? And to whom? The Nazca lines have been studied for nearly a century. Satellites have mapped them. Drones have photographed them. Some of the best archaeological minds in the world have walked among them. And the desert keeps its secret. We know who made them. We know roughly when they were made. We know how they were made. But the why remains as elusive as ever. Were they prayers written on the earth for gods looking down from heaven? Were they ritual pathways walked by priests in ceremonial procession? Were they astronomical markers helping a civilization track the movements of the sky? Or were they something else entirely? Something we do not have the cultural framework to understand because the civilization that created them is gone, taking its reasons with it. The Nazca lines are still there, 2,000 years old and perfectly preserved, waiting in the desert, waiting for someone to finally understand what they are trying to say. Subscribe to Mysterious History for new mysteries every week. The official story is never the whole story. Coming up next on Mysterious History. In the 14th century, something killed half of Europe. 50 million people in 7 years. Historians have called it the Black Death for centuries. But modern scientists are starting to ask an uncomfortable question. What if we have had the cause wrong all along? Next week on Mysterious History.